Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest aliens and UFOs video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's do another encounters video here. These encounters videos on the aliens and UFO side are definitely my most popular ones, so always happy to share more of these for you here. This one yet again comes from the reddit.com website. They're from the subreddit called The Truth Is Here, and in this case, it's an interesting story not just involving a UFO encounter, but possibly a link to some people, some friends of the user that either disappeared or met some gruesome fates. At least they're in turn linking the UFO experience to it. I thought it was a little bit of a stretch. I'm sharing it here nonetheless, so I wanted to make sure that everyone could come up to their own conclusions. But it comes from a user by the name of abide_or_die, and I'll give my own thoughts on it afterward. And they titled it as such. Three of us witnessed a UFO. 6 months later, I was the only one left. I mean, talk about a catchy hook, right, when it comes to the title. So let's go ahead and let's share their entry here, and then let's see what conclusions we can come up to. So here's what they stated. I was asked to tell my UFO story by my friends over in the Reddit RBI site, so here it is. It started in the late winter of 1978. The three of us, myself, Ronnie, and Tom, were working at an outdoor education program high in the San Bernardino Mountains. The outdoor school had taken over a summer camp for the winter semester. And so this camp was located in a saddle in the mountains where the mountains narrowed and bent from the tectonic forces that created them. Now the camp was reached by the rim of the World Highway, which formed the western edge of the camp's property. And so the rim road ran right along the edge of the mountains, with the camp on one side of the road and then a steep drop-off on the other side. And so the road crossed one of the many rock falls, very narrow rock-filled canyons that start at the top of the mountain and then plunge thousands of feet down towards the Los Angeles basin. And so we had snuck out to the rock fall this particular night because we knew that the view of the city lights below would be spectacular. The Santa Ana or Devil's Winds have been blowing up from the desert, up over the mountains, and down into the Los Angeles basin for the previous 3 days. And so the Santa Anas had scrubbed every molecule of smog out of the basin, offering a crystal clear and unobstructed view from 7,000 feet all the way down to the canyon to the city lights below. And so when we arrived at our spot just before midnight, the scene could not have been any more spectacular. Standing on the other side of the highway in a small paved pullout, the city lights were spread out in front of us like a giant multicolored carpet of glowing geometric shapes. The major thoroughfares were lit up in different colors depending on the jurisdiction's choice of streetlights. And so red and moving white snakes of traffic could be seen thousands of feet below, even at this time of night. And we could see all the way down to where the lights ended, and then the Pacific Ocean lay in the darkness. And so we stood in a loose circle, myself, Tom, and Ronnie, huddled up and excited about the amazing sight below us. Ronnie was the one that got down to business, pulling out one of his famous hand-rolled joints. He lit it, as per tradition, took one hit off of it, waved it in the air as he was telling a story. And so following the red cherry arc through the air as Ronnie gesticulated is how I first noticed a very bright orange-white light coming over the top of the mountain behind us. It backlit the mountain and quickly was over the top, traveling down our side of the mountain, following the canyon down towards the basin. We all noticed a change in brightness and then turned towards its origin. And so at first, I thought I heard no sounds, but as it grew closer, coming down the mountain in the next canyon over, I heard sound that to me sounded like what I would imagine an object creating its own vacuum in the atmosphere. At least that's what it would sound like. Like the air itself was being ripped asunder. There was no aircraft noise, just a sudden vacuum, and then an empty place in the air. And so the UFO was vaguely pumpkin seed shaped with a very bright reddish orange glow at the thicker head of the seed and an orangey white vapor trail behind it. It came over the mountain and then down the canyon at a constant height of 100 feet above the mountain, lighting the ground underneath it. And it followed the contour of the canyon until it reached approximately 2,000 feet above the basin below, where it leveled out and then traveled west towards the ocean. And then it dropped 4,000 or 5,000 feet down the canyon below us and then a couple of miles to the west of us, all in less than 10 seconds. The craft was clearly visible, vibrantly glowing as it traversed at a high rate of speed along its path west. And then also clearly visible were the running lights of a small plane flying in a westerly direction ahead of the UFO. And so as we watched the blinking lights of the small craft, we witnessed the UFO rapidly decelerating from its incredible speed down the mountain and then stop right next to the small plane. From our vantage point up on the mountain, the UFO was to the left, and it looked to be at the same altitude, and it was extremely close to that small plane. After matching the plane's speed and a vector for 3 seconds, the UFO suddenly accelerated forward, turned to the left, and then disappeared over the Pacific towards Mexico. It went from the easternmost part of the Los Angeles basin down towards the Long Beach and then out of sight in less than a couple of seconds, leaving behind only a faint orange plasma trail and a pilot with a sudden need to change his underwear. And so we stood transfixed, staring at the empty space where the UFO was, and then all of us looking at each other with a mix of awe and panic in our eyes. Ronnie very slowly and deliberately crushed out the joint on the heel of his boot and then put it in his pocket. And then we all started talking at once. What the F was that? Where did it go? Did you see it stop next to that plane? What can do that? Nothing, that's what. It was at that point that the panic kicked in. We all looked at each other once and then took off, running at full speed back towards our cabins. And so we didn't speak of it until the next time we could be together without anybody else around because, how do you explain crazy talk like this? We had seen a lot of weird blank in our collective lifetimes, but none of us could explain what we saw that night. And so we tried to figure out how we could get some information on what we might have seen. However, we were stuck up in the mountains 5 days a week without TV, newspapers, or radio, and this was way before the internet. This sighting became the pivot point between the three of us, something we could always discuss and try to figure out, but never could. And so after the semester was over, we all went our separate ways that summer. Ronnie went into the California Department of Forestry as a wildland firefighter. Tom traveled to Hawaii to work at a YMCA summer camp. And then I headed back to Big Bear to work at a YMCA summer camp there. And this is where the story gets really weird. Neither Ronnie or Tom lived to see the end of that summer. Ronnie was killed in the Spanish Ranch fire up near San Luis Obispo. Less than 2 weeks after learning that Ronnie was dead, I learned that Tom had disappeared off the coast of Hawaii. The story is that he was on the beach but got swept out to the sea by a rogue wave and then was eaten by sharks. And then his body was never found. To say that I was mentally shaken would be an understatement. To have two of your friends who have witnessed an unearthly UFO encounter die in unusual ways, all within 6 months of seeing this UFO, one by fire and one by water, really freaked me out for a very long time. I kept thinking fire, water, earth, air. There were many years after this that I would not put myself in any situation where one of those elements could kill me. So that's my UFO story. I still do not know what happened that night. All I know is that it was completely mind-boggling and changed my life irrecoverably. I know what happened to Ronnie and have visited the site where he perished. Tom, on the other hand, may still be alive, as I have a strong feeling that he may have faked his own death. But that's a story for another time. And then that's it. That's everything that user abide_or_die stated in their long story. So let's go ahead and let's share some of the information here and talk about it. So for starters, as you can see, this happened back in 1978. So as they mentioned a little bit later, no internet access, no cell phone access. What they were witnessing was pretty much right there in front of them. So unless other people were around at that time, let's say, by that campsite or near and around that basin, they would have been the only witnesses to this encounter. Who knows? Maybe somebody way down below was looking up at that time period. But otherwise, yeah, they would have been the only ones. I was originally gonna dismiss what they kind of saw at least halfway or so because of that story about the joint being lit up. But the fact that only one of them was using it and the rest weren't, that's where it made me realize, holy crap, what they're seeing could truly be something out there within that particular site of the San Bernardino Mountains. Plus, the fact that this thing was almost coming to their location, like in other words, it was purposely flying by them, and then it went to the next nearest thing that attracted its attention. In this case, that plane, shows that there was some intelligence associated with that UFO. That's the impression I got. It was almost like it was skirting the mountains, and then it realized that it had these three humans nearby, and so it wanted to pass by them, and then something else caught its attention, in other words, that small plane, and then it in turn got very close. Imagine that, right? Imagine being on that plane, and then all of a sudden seeing this large pumpkin-shaped UFO with a very bright orange glow to it. And then it's right there with you, and then it's gone. The speed, by the way, is just incredible. I could just imagine when I was reading this information, the stealth that this thing was moving. No sound. In fact, as they were stating, it was almost creating a vacuum when it comes to having no sound. But here it was traversing the entire area within seconds, and then it was literally gone within another couple of seconds out there in the darkness, just leaving that very faint trail of light. It's almost like, for lack of a better term, in those new Star Trek movies, you know how you saw when it went to warp, how it would leave those glittery trails afterward. That's the impression that I got here as well too. Now let's talk about the big elephant in the room, and that's the fact that the user believes what they saw with this UFO and then the deaths of these other two people within the group, how it was linked one and one to each other. I don't know about that. I think it was truly more happen chance when it came to that. Somebody dying by fire absolutely can happen. I mean, it's unfortunate, but you hear about those stories all those time about those brave firefighters and those annual fire events that are happening in the West Coast, like in California and so on. You hear about those firefighters going out there, and then some of them, unfortunately, end up passing away. And so I could totally witness in my head, this would happen to one of the friends there. He went there. He was a firefighter. He was in that location. I don't think the UFO was part of that. Same thing with the other friend who apparently went out to Hawaii and then was swept out to the sea and then potentially eaten by sharks. I mean, that's just way too much out there too. The fact that the main user himself also believes that there could have been more on the lines of somebody faking their death, that seems more plausible to me than something like the other stuff happening, either involving being swept out, eaten by a shark, or having to do with the UFO itself. That just seems like that. But still, I can understand why this guy got paranoid about not wanting to do anything else that could cause him to be able to have these set of gruesome fates. So yeah, I can understand his paranoia associated with them. But yeah, interesting stuff all around, right? Interesting encounter. The fact that this thing just pretty much was just there, gliding by there in the San Bernardino Mountains. Love to hear what your thoughts are. If anyone has any more personal experiences there in the California area, San Bernardino Mountains, if someone knows if that's like a haven for UFO spots, love to see that too. Love to hear your comments on there. All right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care.